Normally we try to organize the world into these neat, separate, predictable boxes.
Right, like local weather goes in one box, the state budget goes in another.
Exactly. And global military strategy gets locked in a heavily fortified box somewhere else in time. Oh, our listeners got something shared. Let's hear it.
Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear, we hear you.
Thanks for chiming in.
Is there something specific in the flow that caught your attention?
We were just setting the stage for how, normally we try to organize the world into these neat, separate, predictable boxes.
Right, like local weather goes in one box, the state budget goes in another.
Exactly. And global military strategy gets locked in a heavily fortified box somewhere else entirely. But today, we're looking at this incredible stack of operational reports and news wires from April 23, 2026, and well, those boxes aren't just connected, they are violently colliding.
They really are. It honestly reads like a geopolitical thriller when you stack it all up.
Yeah, we've got a single day's news cycle connecting the total collapse of a multi-million-dollar winter sports season in Colorado to, of all things, a U.S. soldier winning $400,000 on a classified military bet.
And
normally we try to organize the world into these neat, separate, predictable boxes.
right, like local weather goes in one box, the state budget goes in another.
Exactly. And global military strategy gets locked in a heavily fortified box somewhere else entirely. But today, we're looking at this incredible stack of operational reports and news wires from April 23, 2026, and well, those boxes aren't just connected, they are violently colliding.
They really are. It honestly reads like a geopolitical thriller when you stack it all up.
Yeah, we've got a single day's news cycle connecting the total collapse of a multi-million-dollar winter sports season in Colorado to, of all things, a U.S. soldier winning $400,000 on a classified military bet.
And high stakes, quote unquote, shoot and kill ultimatums in the Middle East. It's wild. But the connective tissue here is something we study constantly, which is systemic fertility.
Normally we try to organize the world into the separate, predictable boxes.
Right, like local weather goes in one box, the state budget goes in another.
Exactly. And global military strategy gets locked in a heavily fortified box somewhere else entirely. But today, we're looking at this incredible stack of operational reports and news wires from April 23, 2026, and well, those boxes aren't just connected, they are violently colliding.
They really are. It honestly reads like a geopolitical thriller when you stack it all up.
Yeah, we've got a single day's news cycle connecting the total collapse of a multi-million-dollar winter sports season in Colorado to, of all things, a U.S. soldier winning $400,000 on a classified military bet.
And high stakes, quote unquote, shoot and kill ultimatums in the Middle East. It's wild. But the connective tissue here is something we study constantly, which is systemic fertility and real-time adaptation.
Right, what happens when the status quo just vanishes?
Exactly. We're looking at what happens to highly complex human systems, whether that's a local mountain town or the Pentagon, when the established norm just collapses without warning and everyone is forced to immediately pivot.
Let's unpack this. And I want to start with the physical environment, because the environment is essentially the ultimate leading indicator for everything else we're going to talk about today.
Oh, absolutely.
The data coming out of the Eagle Valley in Colorado right now isn't just bad, it's staggering. They are facing a historic hydrological deficit.
Yeah, a massive one.
The sources point to SNOWTEL telemetry showing that the regional snowpack melted out entirely by March 31. Now, for anyone who isn't a hydrologist, what are we actually measuring there?
Well, think of SNOWTEL as a vast network of automated robotic weather stations positioned high up in remote mountain watersheds.
Okay.
And they don't just measure how deep the snow is, they measure the snow water equivalent. So the actual moisture content that will eventually run off and supply the region.
Got it. So when that telemetry shows a total meltdown by March 31.
We are looking at the earliest date in recorded history. It's a 41-year low. The calendar has completely decoupled from the climate at this point.
Wow. And the economic fallout of that physical reality hits the ground instantly. Vail and Beaver Creek have completely terminated their ski operations.
Right, they just pulled the plug.
Yeah, and Vail Resorts just reported a 25% decrease in skier days across its Rocky Mountain resorts through April 19th, directly blaming the record heat and the early meltdown.
And to put a 25% drop into perspective, the modern mega resort model is a volume business. A ski mountain operates like a giant funnel with incredibly high overhead.
Right, because you have massive fixed costs.
Exactly. Running the lifts, maintaining the lodges, paying the insurance, you pay that whether you have 10 people in the mountain or 10,000.
So when you lose a quarter of your foot traffic,
You are just losing sales, you are losing the highly lucrative secondary spending. You know, the $25 hamburgers, the equipment rentals, the après-ski drinks, parking fees. That margin just evaporates.
It's an economic emergency brake. I mean, if a town's entire identity and municipal budget are built on the physical resource that literally evaporated weeks early, how do they survive?
It's tough.
It's like a massive theme park losing its main attraction overnight. You wake up, the roller coasters are just gone, and you somehow have to convince people to still come in and buy the overpriced food just for the atmosphere.
Right, and some don't survive it without severe contraction, which is why Vail Resorts is just taking the hit and shutting down. But Copper Mountain is taking an entirely different approach.
Oh yeah, they are bucking the trend completely.
They are leaning right into the chaos. Copper just announced a tactical extension, staying open through May 3.
But wait, how do they justify the operating costs if there's no snow and everyone else is bleeding money?
By entirely changing the value proposition, they slashed their lift ticket prices to a highly accessible $49.
Which is crazy for modern skiing.
Right, in modern ski industry terms, where window prices can clear $250, $49 is practically a rounding error. It's a desperation play to keep the lights on, sure, but it's also a brilliant pivot.
Because they're capitalizing on the vacuum left by Vail closing.
Exactly, and more importantly, they are no longer selling the skiing, they're selling the spectacle.
I totally see that in the schedule for this weekend. Copper is hosting their Suntation event. They've got live music from the record company and Moon Taxi, and the whole thing culminates in the Skimmy Dippers dual pond skim on Sunday at 11:30 a.m.
Right, they're basically telling the public, look, the snow might be terrible, but the party is going to be incredible. They are monetizing the spring conditions rather than fighting them.
A pond skim is the perfect psychological pivot. It turns melting snow into the main attraction.
It really does. And meanwhile, look at the municipal level. The Vail Town Council is actively rewriting their strategic plan to prioritize a new goal called Create a Violent Vail Experience.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's an explicit, on-the-record attempt to sustain their business resiliency, regardless of whether it actually snows. They realize mountain towns can no longer rely on the physical calendar.
But, Vail prioritizing the town experience over snow sounds great in a boardroom. But the reality of executing that pivot hits a brick wall the second you look at the state's actual infrastructure.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you can't invite people to experience your vibrant town if the systems required to get them there are bubbling. The friction from this unpredictable climate cascades straight down into state logistics and the cost of living for everyday residents.
The local strain always amplifies the state level strain, and the best example of that in our sources today is the insurance market.
Yeah, let's talk about the governor's plan.
Right, so Governor Jared Polis just set a new legislative target to lower average annual homeowner insurance rates by $800 by the end of 2027 to help residents out.
And let's break down why that's happening, because insurance isn't spiking in a vacuum. It's directly tied to that snowball data we just talked about.
Exactly.
Early meltdown means dry springs, which means extended wildfire seasons, which means actuaries and corporate offices are panicking and hiking premiums.
That is the exact mechanism. Actuaries price risk based on historical data. But when the historical data is a 41-year anomaly, the models break.
And the consumer absorbs the cost.
Yes, and while the governor is trying to push that $800 relief target, the political machinery responsible for actually managing the environment is just grinding its gears. State senators just rejected 2 of Governor Polis's 3 appointments for the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission.
Which is wild timing, because wildlife officials just confirmed that Jackson and Grant counties remain the primary hotspots for confirmed wolf activity this April.
Right, so you literally have apex predators establishing new territorial footprints in the region, while the State Wildlife Commission is locked in a political stalemate over who is actually in charge.
It's incredible, and we see the same thing happening with the physical infrastructure. Buckstang, the state transit system, has a massive $25 million funding shortfall right now.
Yeah, and officials are scrambling to plug that hole using express lane tolls, but they are already warning that I-70 revenue alone won't be enough.
And the actual highway is a logistical nightmare anyway. The West Bell Pass Auxiliary Lane project has resumed. Glenwood Canyon is operating at a restricted 50% capacity with a strictly enforced 35-mile-per-hour speed limit.
And, crucially, an 11-foot width restriction due to bridge joint reconstruction.
Right, if you're a trucking company trying to move goods, an 11-foot width restriction means your standard wide-load supply chain has to entirely reroute, which adds massive fuel and time costs. Oh, and the traction law, Code 15, remains active.
Right, meaning every vehicle still needs specific snow tires or chains, despite the snow melting out early. So think about the compounding effect of all that.
It's chaos.
The transit system is broke. The primary supply chain artery is restricted to 35 miles per hour. The weather requires snow tires, but the resorts are closed because it's too hot.
Which brings me to a really pointed question about these timelines. Setting a legislative goal to reduce insurance by $800 by the year 2027 to fix a crisis happening right now. Is that just putting a tiny financial band aid on a massive, gaping infrastructure wound?
It really feels like it.
I mean, if the Mustang is $25 million in the hole today and I 70 is practically a parking lot of construction today, aren't we just rearranging deck chairs?
This raises an important question because you've hit on the core vulnerability of modern governance. State governments are fundamentally trapped.
Trapped how?
Well, they are legally mandated to fund and maintain outdated mid 20th century infrastructure models using a legislative process that takes years. But the crises they are battling, like exponential insurance spikes and sudden climate shifts, those move at the speed of days or weeks.
Wow, yeah.
So they're bringing a multi-year timeline to an immediate structural crisis.
And while local and state leaders frantically try to adapt to that, the national and global stages are experiencing their own extreme whiplash.
Oh, completely. The global news wire is intense today.
It is, and actually, before we get into this next batch of sources, I need to pause and explicitly say this to you listening. Our sources today contain some highly politically charged updates from the federal and international levels. And our goal here is never to take a side, left or right. We are strictly here to impartially report the facts as they appear in the source material, and to examine how these rapid political shifts impact global logistics.
Yeah, the focus is purely on the operational impact because the scale of the whiplash today is just remarkable.
Let's look at the facts. In the Middle East, President Trump has ordered the U.S. Navy to, quote, shoot and kill any Iranian small boats attempting to block or lay mines in the Strait of Hormuz.
And we really need to understand why the Strait of Hormuz is so critical. It is a geographical bottleneck, barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest point.
Right.
A massive percentage of the world's daily oil consumption passes through that specific corridor. When a shoot and kill order is issued there, global freight insurance premiums skyrocket instantly. Energy markets brace for shockwaves.
It is maximum level military escalation.
Absolutely.
But simultaneously, he announced a 3-week extension of the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. So we have the Navy ordered to shoot to kill in one breath, and diplomats extending a ceasefire in the next.
Right, the juxtaposition is dizzying. We are seeing maximum escalation happening concurrently with de-escalation.
And intense internal administrative turbulence, too. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has forced out the Navy Secretary, John Phelan. Undersecretary Hun Cao will now serve as the acting secretary.
Just think about that timing. You have maximum military escalation orders being executed in Hormuz, while the naval leadership apparatus itself is being dismantled and rebuilt in real time.
And we're seeing huge policy pivots domestically, too. In a historic shift, the Trump administration has reclassified state-licensed medical marijuana as a less dangerous Schedule III drug.
Which completely rewrites the banking and tax regulations for a multi-billion-dollar industry practically overnight.
But out of all the national security updates in our stack today, this next one is the absolute wild card.
Oh, the gambling story.
Yes, I'm in sheer disbelief over this. A U.S. soldier has been federally charged with using classified intelligence to win over $400,000 on a gambling bet regarding the military raid on Venezuelan leader Maduro.
It sounds like a movie plot, but it's very real.
I mean, here's where it gets really interesting. We have billion-dollar global security apparatuses. We spend fortunes on encrypted satellites. And someone treats classified intel like a tip sheet at the horse track.
It massive blind spot in modern security. You have to understand how these offshore prediction markets work. They allow users to wager on geopolitical events or even military actions.
Right.
The Pentagon invests trillions of hardware to prevent state-sponsored hacking. But traditional security is largely blind to a single soldier with a smartphone monetizing a troop movement on an offshore betting site. The human element completely circumvented the trillion-dollar firewall.
Unbelievable. So if we connect this foreign policy whiplash back to the overarching theme, just like the weather in Colorado, global security relies on predictable norms.
Exactly. Energy markets need to know the rules of engagement in Hormuz. Diplomats need to know who the Secretary of the Navy actually is.
But right now, those predictable norms are completely fractured.
You have escalation, de-escalation, cabinet ousters, and intelligence leaks happening simultaneously.
So if you're just a person trying to live your life, how do human beings handle this much macro-level chaos? The climate is acting unpredictably, state infrastructure is buckling, global security is volatile. It has to be exhausting.
Well, sociologically, it triggers a very specific survival mechanism. When the global news is terrifying and the regional economy is slumping, people naturally hyper-focus on their local communities to find stability.
They shrink their world down.
Right, you anchor yourself to the things you can actually touch and influence.
That perfectly contextualizes the final section of our sources today. Because when you look at the ground level community updates in the Eagle Valley, it's a completely different tone.
People aren't panicking, they're actively gathering.
Exactly. For example, today, April 23, from 2:00 p.m. to 4:00 p.m., the Bookworm of Edwards is hosting an event called A Pray with an Advocate.
Yeah, they are partnering with the Bright Future Foundation and the Eagle County Sheriff's Office for Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
And we see that same momentum with local businesses. Little Bear Cafe is bringing expanded menus and longer hours to Eagleville, filling the void left by the former Big Bear Bistro.
And a new sustainable circular fashion store called Full Circle Fashion just opened in the Eagle Core, which makes perfect sense in this environment, by the way.
How so?
Well, when the local economy is reeling from an early snowmelt, a business model built on sustainability directly addresses the community's underlying anxiety about the climate.
That's a great point. Also, looking ahead to Saturday, April 25, local police departments are hosting Prescription Drug Take-Back Day. Very localized, hyper-practical events, but the update that really got me was the local sports wire.
The track meet?
Yes. Despite the terrible weather, the early meltdown, and all the macro-level chaos we've discussed, Battle Mountain and Eagle Valley High School track teams just set program records at the Coleridge Invite.
That is genuine resilience in practice.
It really is. While the Fruit of Hormuz is locked down and the skiing industry is losing a quarter of its visitors, kids are out there running through the freezing rain and breaking track records. It's the ultimate psychological pressure valve for a community.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is why these local updates matter so much. Events like grabbing coffee at the newly expanded Little Bear Cafe or attending an advocacy meeting at a bookshop, these actions are the societal glue.
They hold things together.
Exactly. They provide the predictable calendar that the climate and the federal government can no longer provide.
Wow. We have covered an incredible scope of information in this deep dive into the sources today. From a 25% drop in skier visits due to early snowmelt, to the governor's $800 insurance target.
To a $400,000 classified military bet and shoot and kill orders in the Strait of Hormuz.
So what does this all mean for you? It proves that whether you are running a local coffee shop, managing a ski resort, or navigating global shipping lanes, the ability to rapidly adapt is now the most valuable skill on earth.
It really is. And, as we look at how fast the rules are changing, it makes you wonder about the future of long-term planning.
What do you mean?
Well, if our climate, our economies, and our geopolitical boundaries can flip in a matter of days, will future generations look back at our 5-year plans or 10-year mortgages the same way we look at the horse and buggy? Are we entering an era where living in a state of permanent, daily improvisation is the only way to survive?
That is a fascinating thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the sources. Remember to stay curious, keep adapting, and we'll see you next time.